Thanks for joining us for the Portland Press Herald podcast. Question 5. This time, Kyle Bailey, campaign manager for the Ranked Choice Committee, debates Senate Representative Heather Sirocki over Question 5, an act to establish ranked choice voting, at a meeting of the Portland Press Herald Editorial Board.
I'm Greg Kessich, I'm the editorial page editor.
I'm Heather Sirocki, state representative serving part of Scarborough.
I'm Mike Chinken, I'm Heather's observer.
Kyle Bailey, I'm the campaign manager for Yes on 5.
Felicia and I, Kyle's observer.
Ben Bragdon, I'm the editorial page editor for the Morning Sentinel and Kennebec Journal.
Lisa DeSisto, I'm the publisher of Maine Today Media.
Sarah Collins, the assistant editorial page editor for the Press Herald.
Thank you very much for coming in. What we were asking you to do is to help us kind of make up our minds by you working through the issues, identifying where the conflicts are. We probably can't expect to get you to agree on every conflict, but it helps us to know what they are, what the points are, where you disagree. And as much as you can do to tell us Kyle, from your perspective, what problem would this law solve? And Heather, what are the costs of trying to solve the problem this way? And maybe you can disagree on what the problem is. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys to sort of set the parameters, but we'll chip in with questions from time to time. But as much as possible, I'd really like to see you kind of have a conversation and kind of challenge each other in the ways that you disagree. And that said, I'm going to start off with you, Kyle.
Sure.
First, you're the moving party. So, what is the problem that this law would solve?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. So, in 9 of the last 11 elections for Maine's governor, the candidate who won received less than 50% of the votes cast. In 5 of those races, the candidate received less than 40% of the vote. So, over 60% of voters were voting for someone else. Now, non-majority winners in gubernatorial races include 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 2 independents. Maine has had a rich history and tradition of independent and third-party candidates running for office. Mainers like having choices. Since 1974, when Jim Longley was elected Maine's first independent governor, we've had more than 2 choices. Only one head-to-head race for governor in the last 40 years in Maine. And when there are simply 2 candidates running, one candidate is going to get a majority. And it may not be the candidate that you like the best, but at least you know a majority of your friends and neighbors want to go in that particular direction. But as soon as a 3rd, 4th, or 5th candidate enters the race, suddenly someone can win with 30% of the vote, 35% of the vote. And that candidate could be opposed by a majority of voters. The wishes of voters, the true preferences of voters are unknown in those races. So instead of having to appeal as a candidate beyond your base, talk to more voters who don't agree with you on all the issues, and build a majority coalition, you can win as a candidate under the current system by energizing your base, turning them out to vote, and beating the heck out of your opponents and just squeaking by with 35, 36, 37% of the vote. That has contributed directly to the challenges we see in our politics today. Overwhelmingly, Mainers say that they're tired of the hyperpartisanship, polarization, and gridlock in Augusta and in Washington. Voices are saying it's getting only worse in Maine. Now, ranked choice voting isn't a panacea. It's not a solution to all the challenges our democracy face, but it's something we can do now to improve it by restoring majority rule, by eliminating the spoiler effect in elections. So you, as a voter, never have to vote for the lesser of 2 evils. When there's another candidate you really like, you're free to vote for the candidate you really like without feeling you'll help to elect the candidate you dislike or worrying that your vote will be wasted. And at the end of the day, we know that the person who wins under a ranked choice system is the majority supported candidate. They are the consensus candidate supported by Maine people. And they've built a majority coalition so that when they get to Augusta and in Washington, they can govern more collaboratively. They have to listen to the voices of people on the campaign trail, but also in the governing process. And they're accountable to more Maine people. And that's an improvement over the current voting system, which contributes to some of the negative culture and climate in our politics and a real decline in civility and an increase in negativity that we've seen in the last decade in particular, but we've seen it increasingly over the last 40 years.
And how would this law fix that?
So ranked choice voting gives you as a voter the power to rank the candidates from your favorite to your least favorite. You can rank as many or as few candidates as you like, knowing that if no candidate receives an outright majority, your vote's not wasted. If your favorite candidate is in last place, there's eliminated in this process of instant runoffs, your vote still counts for your second choice, and you participate along with everyone else in electing our leaders more broadly. So ranked choice voting works just like actual runoff elections, without the cost and delay that comes with having whole new elections to narrow down the field of candidates. And so it's the most cost-effective and efficient way, as State Treasurer Terry Hayes has said, to have majority rule. And it has those positive components as well, where it eliminates the spoiler effect. So there is no more lesser of two evils. How many voters walk into the voting booth now and are voting against a candidate or a party rather than for a candidate or a party or what they believe? A lot of voters are feeling that. And with ranked choice voting, you never have to vote for the lesser of two evils. That's a pretty powerful shift in the experience for the voter, to have campaigns where candidates have to knock on the doors of voters who don't agree with them on all the issues and say, if I can't be your first choice, can I be your second choice? Let's talk about the issues, rather than having that candidate be able to say, vote for me because she can't win and you hate him, which is what can happen now under our politics. This fundamentally changes the way we vote, the way parties, PACs, and politicians engage with one another, but also how they engage with voters in a way that improves Maine's political climate.
Heather?
Thank you. First, I'd like to start with the actual phrasing of the question and some issues with that, and I do have copies of that for all of you here if you don't have copies of that in front of you. And I will read it to you. The question is phrased, do you want to allow voters to rank their choices of candidates in elections for U.S. Senate, Congress, Governor, State Senate, and State Representative, and to have ballots counted at the state level in multiple rounds in which last place candidates are eliminated until a candidate wins by majority? There was a lot of debate about the phrasing of this question. And Secretary of State Matt Dunlap has a tough job to take these ballot initiatives and condense them down to a question form so the voter can truly understand what is being asked of them. He admitted to me there was a raging argument over one word, the word majority, between our Attorney General, Janet Mills, and himself. When you read the fine print of this bill, the actual text of the bill, the word majority is nowhere to be found in the text of the bill. This does not guarantee a majority. It does not guarantee a majority of the votes cast. It only guarantees a majority of the leftover ballots, because with ranked choice voting, there's something called exhausted ballots, which means you redefine the majority as you go through the rounds. So this proposal does not guarantee a majority. I agree with Attorney General Janet Mills. The word majority in the actual question of the ballot is an issue. This is deceptive to the voters. It does not guarantee a majority of all of the ballots cast, only of the leftover ballots. And to tell you how significant the numbers can be, there is a very well-documented race in San Francisco where about 18,800 people voted. And with the majority, you would have to have roughly 9,000 plus one voters to determine a majority, half of 18,000. Instead, the voter in that, the candidate in that election won with 4,321 votes. That's thousands of ballots that were either exhausted or spoiled. That's a very high spoiler rate. So in California, there are some cities like Portland here in Maine that have adopted ranked choice voting at the municipal level. I
Can I ask you a question? Would you have the same objection to an actual runoff that was done on a different date if fewer people came to the second election than voted in the first one?
Okay, that brings me to that point. To state that an instant runoff is exactly like a runoff election is not true. You're right, there's a lower voter turnout with a runoff election, but the distinction is with a runoff, the top two vote getters duke it out. Those are the two that are on the reprinted ballots. With ranked choice voting, that is not necessarily what happens. The top two vote getters may not be the person who wins at the end of the day. It's the person with the most second place votes in the rounds as they go through the rounds.
And the most second place votes of the people who got the fewest votes.
Exactly.
So
that's right.
Assuming that they got the fewest votes,
so
that means there's fewer of their second place votes. It's unlikely somebody's going to rush from the bottom to the top, right?
But it has happened.
Okay.
It has happened. So Governor Jerry Brown, this week on September 29th, was presented a bill which he vetoed in California. And this involves ranked choice voting in California. His veto message is very clear. It says, in a time when we want to encourage more voter participation, we need to keep voting simple. Ranked choice voting is overly complicated and confusing. I believe it deprives voters of genuinely informed choice. Now, he was the mayor of Oakland. He has firsthand experience with ranked choice voting. That is one of the cities that has ranked choice voting in place. He has seen exactly what can happen with this system and how difficult it is to explain to our English as second language population, how difficult it is to explain to the people that are in assisted living facilities or nursing homes that maybe have early signs of dementia. It's a much more complicated ballot for those individuals to follow. And when you look at those populations in other cities, and I have data on that as well, the spoiled ballot rate, people that are filling the ballots out incorrectly, rises dramatically in those populations. So that is a concern as well. And when you talk
before
about...
you go into more detail, could you just look at the question of what you see the harm is, overall, and then I think it'll help us to put your details into more, detailed arguments into context. So, what do you think the danger of this would be? Is it the voter turnout? Is it what do you think the result that you would be afraid of if this were to be the law?
I would look to where other municipalities have repealed and rejected this to see what could happen.
Which is what?
Which is definitely lower voter turnout, with spoiled ballot rate increases, deceiving the public into thinking they have elected a majority candidate when in fact they have not. It does not guarantee a majority. And it also, the last sentence that Governor Brown wrote, I believe it deprives voters of genuinely informed choice, is very interesting because when you want to be liked and you want to come in second, I'm a candidate. I knock on every door when I campaign. Voters want to know where you stand on the issues, but if you want to be liked, you might be a little more coy with your answers. You might not be as straightforward. And you may want to be liked, come in second place on with a lot of voters, and you're not really informing them of your true position on issues. So I'm not sure that it definitely does guarantee that people are going to be more informed. So I'm worried about that. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is I really strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, to read Janet Mills' 6-page legal opinion. And the first sentence of the third paragraph I thought was quite telling. We have received comments from some legislators, and others urging our office not to address the constitutionality of LD 1557 before the initiative is presented to the voters. Before the initiative is presented. So what? You're going to present this information after we vote? Is that somehow suppressing information to the voters? That's what it says to me. And why would a sitting legislator...
What matters is what the voters say, and then if you have to amend the Constitution,
No,
you amend the Constitution.
I completely disagree with that view because I do believe in the real rule of law. I do believe we have a Constitution for a reason. And when we are elected to office, one of the first things that happens is we take an oath. We take an oath to uphold and defend both the U.S. and the Maine Constitution. It's my obligation to inform the voters. I feel that there's a problem with this bill when I know that there are...
Have you ever voted to amend the Constitution as a member of the legislature?
I don't know that we've had a proposal brought before us while I've served.
Because it happens.
It does happen, but it doesn't happen. You don't put the cart before the horse. You don't make a law and pass it illegally and present it to the voters without telling them that it's potentially quite illegal and then fix it afterwards. And that has...
How do you take it to court if it hasn't happened yet? What standing would you have to take that to court?
You don't have any standing to take it to court because it hasn't happened yet. So it is a flawed
so you
process.
Have to see if it happens first before you take it to court.
Well, actually, no. What you would have to do is identify that you would like to change to this new style of voting. You would have to review the Constitution, make the amendments to the Constitution, and then present the proposal. You don't do it this way. This is backwards. This is the cart before the horse. And I've had actual sitting legislators that have come out in favor of ranked choice voting and have flipped their position on that point. They are uncomfortable with this.
Kyle, could you address the issues of lower voter turnout, confusing, spoiled ballots, deceiving voters?
Sure.
Especially the issue of that it would make candidates less honest.
So yeah, lots of issues to address there. So first of all, Representative Sirocki has raised questions about the Constitution. So courts in 4 states have ruled that ranked choice voting is fully constitutional. That's 2 state Supreme Courts, a federal court, and a state court. They've said it is a system that upholds one person, one vote. Also, going back to 1941, the Massachusetts Supreme Court has said ranked choice voting is a plurality voting system, that it meets that test. And it's been upheld in court for 75 years. So that's an important point to note. So Larry Diamond, who is the editor of the Journal of Democracy, has been writing and studying about democracy around the world for 35 years. Has a piece out in the Bangor Daily News today talking about the fact that this is the second most important election in the country this year. And that ranked choice voting really is a better system. Sandy Maisel, who is the government chair at Colby College and is a national expert on elections, has said, and I quote, of advocates for ranked choice voting, and political science research. They do say that it works, ranked choice voting, to have some of the beneficial consequences its proponents seek: increased turnout, majority winners, less incivility, the elimination of the spoiler effect, without the obvious negative consequences some opponents fear. Their conclusions are worth considering of the political science research. So political scientists have been studying ranked choice voting for a long time. Australia has used it for 100 years to elect its lower house of parliament. It's been tried and tested around the world, and it's worked. And it's worked right here in Portland, where voters have now had 2 elections with ranked choice voting. And thank goodness they had it in 2011 when 15 candidates decided to run, because, as your paper noted, after that election, it ensured that the candidate who won received a majority of votes cast in the final round of tabulation. Ranked choice voting always ensures that the candidate with the most votes in the final round of tabulation receives a majority. To Representative Sirocki's point about exhausted ballots, artificial majority, no one can force you to rank more than one candidate. Ranked choice voting simply gives you the option to rank as many or as few as you like. If you go into the voting booth and there's 3 candidates and you only like one of them and you say to heck with the other 2, you can just rank that one candidate as your first choice. But if no candidate receives an outright majority and your favorite candidate's in last place, you're deciding not to participate in the instant runoff. Does your vote count less? No. And courts have said that your vote counts just as much as everyone else's. When the results of the election are published, your vote is made known that you didn't like either one of these candidates, right? So everyone has equal say. This upholds equal protection issues in the Constitution. The courts have said this time and time again. Dimitri Baum, who's the constitutional scholar at the University of Maine School of Law, has written extensively about addressing some of those questions that Representative Sirocki has raised. So let's put that aside. Every single place that has ranked choice voting today in the United States, a majority of voters in those cities support it. By a margin of about 12 points, voters in cities with ranked choice voting say they are satisfied with their election system more so than voters in places that don't have ranked choice voting, where less than a majority of voters are satisfied with their elections. There's a study done by Rutgers University that really dove into comparing United States cities with ranked choice voting and cities without ranked choice voting, comparable cities. They found voters and candidates in cities with ranked choice voting reported greater satisfaction. They reported less negative campaigning, because as a candidate, when you in a ranked choice election are trying to reach out broadly and attract first and second choice rankings, and again, the Portland Press Herald has written about this in the mayoral race, and both Ethan Strimley and Mike Brennan are supporters of ranked choice voting, who both won and lost under the system. They've said that when they campaigned under ranked choice, if they saw a yard sign for one of their opponents, instead of skipping that door under the old system, with ranked choice, they had to go knock on that door and talk to that voter, because if they couldn't be that voter's first choice, they wanted to be their second choice. And they knew if they ran a trash and burn campaign, overly negative, nasty mailers, that voter would be less likely to make them their second choice. And so parties, PACs, and politicians not only have to think differently about how they engage with voters, but how they engage with one another. Looking at the data from places that have ranked choice voting, in addition to voter surveys, exit polling by universities, public policy institutions, all of which say First, over 90% of voters say this is easy or somewhat easy to understand. We rank choices every day of our lives. If I go to Dunkin' Donuts and I'd order a multigrain bagel and I'm told they're out of the multigrain bagel, I get the garlic bagel. I know what my second choice is. It's really insulting to voters to suggest that they would not be able to rank a second choice in an election. And so that's what voters self-report. Now, if you look at spoiled ballot rates, overvote rates, which is the back-end data that says, okay, what is the real voter experience? Are there problems? The rates of overvotes with ranked choice voting are comparable to the rates of cities that use other voting systems. And I've got a sheet here in a packet for you that goes list by list of the cities and what the overvote rates are under ranked choice voting versus the old way of voting in those cities. The final thing I think I would say is, there are some politicians and pundits who don't like ranked choice voting. Change can be scary, especially for those who benefit from the status quo. Politicians in California and elsewhere like Jerry Brown, who've been around a long time, may have some angst about change. If you've been elected over and over again under the current system, it might cause you some angst about what might that experience be like. But I think we have to look at the places that have had ranked choice voting across the United States for years that use it, where voters are satisfied, and where candidates say, hey, you know what, my opponents sling less mud at me. I think it's a better system. With regards to Representative Sirocki's claim about, some places have repealed this, there are 2 cities in the United States that had ranked choice voting that no longer do, in which the candidate who received the most votes on the first round ended up losing the election once the voices of voters were truly heard through the instant runoff process and a consensus candidate was reached. That was Burlington and Ann Arbor. And in both of those situations, the supporters of the losing candidate, first in Ann Arbor in 1975, appealed that decision in court, saying this is unconstitutional, it violates plurality, all these issues. And the court said, no, voters have the right to choose their voting method. That's simply what it is. And so they decided to repeal it in Ann Arbor on a low turnout special election where they got out their supporters. In Burlington, Vermont, they used it twice. Same situation. Backers of the candidate who came in first place in the first round but ended up losing the election because that candidate was opposed by a majority of voters. Their supporters challenged it again. It went to a special election ballot, low turnout election, and a vote of 52-48, voters repealed it over the wishes of the League of Women Voters and other places. But it's interesting enough, those 2 places didn't go back to first past the post, which is the way we vote now. They both went back to another runoff system. So no place that's had ranked choice voting has ever gone back to first past the post, which is the way we vote now in Maine, because all the political science research, all the studies, all the voter experience information says ranked choice voting is a better voting system than the one we have now in Maine.
So are you saying that we don't need to worry about the specific language in the Maine Constitution about plurality for gubernatorial races, that doesn't create an extra set of questions around this proposal?
Well, I think you have to look at legal precedent, which says, going back to 1941, that ranked choice voting is a plurality voting system. It's interesting that our opponents, on one hand, say ranked choice voting is unconstitutional because it's a majority voting system, and yet on the other hand say it produces an artificial majority. It's a plurality voting system. Which one do you think it is? I mean, that's an interesting question for our opponents, because they are saying at one time it's a majority voting system and at another time it's a plurality voting system. But the courts have said it's a plurality voting system. It makes sure that, as Maine Constitution says, after all the votes are received, sorted, and counted, the candidate with the most votes must be declared the winner. Well, that's what happens with ranked choice voting, just like it happens with the system now. It's simply a different method for tabulating the votes. Maine's Constitution sets broad tests. Maine's Constitution does not say we have to use a particular voting method. That's up to voters, right? If we voted the way we voted in 1820, we'd use parchment paper and a quill pen. But we have optical scanners, we have accessible voting machines, we do things differently. Voters get a chance to decide how they elect the politicians. And when the Constitution was amended in the 1800s to replace the word majority with plurality, you have to really look at the history of that, in that there was an election in 1878, And at that point, the legislature got to pick the governor if no candidate got an outright majority, because the Constitution required a majority and gave that power to the legislature. The legislature picked the candidate who came in third place to be governor. There was outrage. There were snipers on top of the Capitol. General Chamberlain had to be called out of retirement and put himself in the way of what could have erupted into a civil war. Voters were outraged. What voters then did was amend the Constitution to say the people must have the power to elect the politicians, not having the legislature get to pick who our governor was going to be. This initiative for ranked choice voting is in that same spirit of putting more power in the hands of voters so that your voice matters more, you have more choice in our democracy, you never have to vote for the lesser of two evils when there's another candidate you like. We as voters have the right to decide which voting system we want to use. And that's the question before voters with ranked choice voting.
Isn't this all about just one guy? Isn't this about Paul LePage? And you said 9 out of 11 gubernatorial elections were decided with less than a majority, and in 8 of them we never heard about ranked choice voting. Isn't this really about trying to kind of close the barn door after the horse is gone?
No, because ranked choice voting conversations started happening in the 1990s in Maine. The first bill was introduced in the Maine legislature in 2001 when independent Angus King was governor, and then Republicans introduced it along with Democrats.
34%.
35% in his first race, yes.
And that bill went where?
Nowhere. It was discussed in committee. Well, no. So in 2006, John Baldacci, a Democrat, was reelected with 38% of the vote. So several Republicans as well as Democrats teamed up and introduced ranked choice voting legislation. Sometimes with new ideas, it takes time for them to bubble up. That's what's been happening over the last 15 years.
Were overly partisan? Do you think John Baldacci was a hardcore Democrat who whipped up his base and beat up on Republicans?
Look, I'm not going to comment about any particular governor and how they governed. I'm really
talking about in terms of, because the problem you're saying that this would fix is hyper-partisan elections, and that hasn't been really Maine's history. Has it, or has it?
Well, I think our politics has gotten increasingly worse in the last few years, and in the last decade in particular. We've seen more partisanship, hyper-partisanship, polarization, gridlock in Augusta in particular. It's gotten increasingly worse, and both sides are to blame. It's not Democrats or Republicans. It's equal opportunity in terms of who's participating in the decline of the system. And what can happen when candidates win with 35% of the vote, by the way, not just in a general election, but in a primary, is you can win with an enthusiastic, passionate base of supporters on either political extreme, and the voices of the vast majority of us in the middle aren't being heard. That's both true in the primary and general election. So ranked choice voting makes sure that candidates can't just win with an enthusiastic, passionate, narrow base of support. They have to be acceptable to the broader middle of voters. They have to be a consensus candidate who can reach out to moderates, that's moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, conservative Democrats, liberal Republicans, and build a coalition in the general election and in their own primary. They have to be the type of candidate who can reach out to conservatives, liberals, and moderates within their own primary to build a majority coalition. So the parties end up actually putting their best foot forward with a ranked choice voting system, but at the same time, it also levels the playing field for independent third-party candidates to participate, to raise issues, to hold the big parties accountable, and to do their best to try to attract first and second choice rankings as well.
I have some questions about parties, but I think Representative Sirocki.
If you don't mind, yes, thank you.
This is your,
I look to where this has been implemented to see what the feedback is from people that are actually experiencing this method of voting. And there is an article here from San Francisco, a supervisor from San Francisco, and he says here, the promise of less negative campaigning certainly has not materialized. If anyone paid attention to this year's mayor's race, the majority of the campaigning that happened was negative, especially in the last 6 weeks. So in San Francisco, this has not panned out to be so, at least to this person's opinion. I'd like to go back to both the sour grapes issue and the violations to the Maine Constitution. There's more than the violation of the plurality versus majority phrasing, which would need to be determined. We also have a violation on the way we tabulate the votes. That is a really important piece of this bill that changes the location of tabulating. The Maine Constitution requires that the tabulation take place locally. So where I live in Scarborough, we tabulate the votes in Scarborough. This is going to require armed escorts. We're going to have to bring ballots from every municipality to one location. We have to have, of course, the new software in order to run the program. There is a cost. It is up in the air as to what exactly that cost will be. I don't know how much it would cost in additional staff at the local level, so the municipalities are going to have to absorb that cost. I don't know who pays for the armed escorts to transport all these ballots. And that when I talked to Matt Dunlap, our Secretary of State, that was a concern. I mean, I can drive from Scarborough to Pennsylvania in 6 hours. I can drive from Scarborough to Madawaska and still be in Maine. Maine is a large state with a lot of small municipalities, and you've got to transport ballots. That opens up the question of just being vulnerable when you start carting around boxes and carts of ballots. And then the tie-breaking issue. Yes, it would be a very rare occurrence for a tie to occur, but that is part of the language of this bill. I have no idea why the drafters of this bill decided they had to put that in there. But if you're going to run a race, we work hard to campaign. We work hard to earn the votes that we receive. If we end up with a tie, currently the Maine Constitution requires that the legislature break that tie. They vote. Someone's responsible. There's an actual vote. There's a process. This is by lot. By lot. What do you mean? My race is determined by the flip of a coin? Is that what that is? Why is that even in this bill? I don't know who put that in there. That is ridiculous. So I don't support that either. And as far as the sour grapes go, I can tell you that in about March of this year, I received a nice stack of yellow postcards, as did a number of other legislators. Those postcards were completed by voters back in November when they signed the petition. And those postcards say that they support ranked choice voting and they hope that I will too. And they provide their contact information. So I took the time, which took hours. I contacted every single one of those voters. And I spoke with them. And almost without exception, it was a sour grapes issue as to why they decided to sign that petition. Yes. And when I explained to them that that is a poor reason in my mind to be legislating and changing a whole voting system over the outcome of one race with one person, and that when I explained the constitutional issues and the way ranked choice voting actually works, with the exception of one person, they all changed their minds. So when the voters have more information and really truly understand what's being proposed here, they do not support it. There are concerns with this.
Can I just jump in there? So Peter Mills, former Republican state senator and head of the Maine Turnpike Authority, doesn't support ranked choice voting because of sour grapes. Stacey Fitz, former state representative, a Republican from Pittsfield, doesn't support ranked choice voting because it's about sour grapes. Nelson Durgan, a Republican on the Bangor City Council, former adjunct general of the Maine National Guard, doesn't support ranked choice voting because of sour grapes. We have seen a decline in the civility in campaigns. We've seen increasing partisanship, hyperpartisanship, and polarization in our politics. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Greens, and Libertarians broadly support this initiative. We have donors, volunteers to our grassroots campaign who represent the broad spectrum of Mainers. Look at our campaign committee. It includes some of those names I mentioned and many more, roughly an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. The same is true with our county co-chairs, roughly an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. Just this week, we released business leaders for ranked choice voting. It includes individuals who voted for Paula Page twice. It included people who supported Elliot Cutler, included people who supported Libby Mitchell and Mike Michaud. So this isn't about one party or one politician. This is about a system that is broken, that isn't working. And there are some challenges facing our democracy that might take years or decades to address. And there's no one solution to everything. But in about 4 weeks, we're going to have an opportunity to vote on this question. And this is something we can do now, ranked choice voting, to improve Maine's political process. Not because of one candidate or one party, but for generations to come, to change the way parties and politicians and PACs engage with one another and with voters, to put more power in the hands of voters. So your voice matters more with a ranked choice ballot. You have more choice. We finally have a system that accommodates the choices that we already have, but that we don't oftentimes get to exercise because campaigns become all about strategic voting. What do the polls say? I don't want to waste my vote. And the issues take a back seat. That's really unhealthy for our democracy. We need to have robust campaigns about the issues. And until we change the process, we're not going to get different outcomes. We have got to change the way we elect Maine's leaders to improve the political process, because absent of that, I mean, we can make other changes and tweak other things, but this is one of the things we really do have to do. And we've seen a decline in Maine, in our campaigns, in our politics. Only 7% of Mainers think our democracy is working well. Vastly, Mainers think it's not. 86% of Mainers are concerned about political partisanship in Augusta. 72% say we need substantial political reform in Maine. 89% say we need to change how our system works.
Sorry, you mentioned they've been studying this for years, and you've had some anecdotal things. People surveyed say the campaign was more civil. Is there any more hard data on that? You've both given anecdotes of people saying they saw it one way or the other. But since this is such a central part of why we should pass this, is there a better way to measure it?
So in your packet, page 6 and 7, talks about survey data on voter understanding of ranked choice. It is studies conducted by universities, public policy institutions, exit polling done by different agencies. It's Rutgers study, which shows that voters understand this and don't have a problem ranking the candidates. It's very easy. It shows that voters report less negative campaigning. So in 2011 in Portland, 40% of voters said that they experienced less negative campaigning. I mean, does it eliminate negative campaigning? No, but it can help, and it's something we can do now to help.
The first time we ever had a mayor election.
Well, but that's what elections show across the country. When you compare, look at cities that have ranked choice voting. Rutgers University said voters and candidates report on average about a 40% decline in negative campaigning. That's not just voters, but it's candidates saying, I got less mud slung at me by my competitors.
So doesn't this weaken parties if I was a candidate, why would I submit myself to a primary if I knew I was going to be part of a runoff with the nominee? I could stay on an equal footing with the nominee in November. Why wouldn't that drive candidates out of the primary process? And the harm there, I think, would be that parties are already getting very weak, except for in the State House, where they run everything.
Well, parties are I recognize your point. The parties are getting weaker because so few people participate in the party primaries. It's part of the challenge. So, we need to have a system that encourages competition and healthy debate. So with ranked choice voting, you can't just win with your narrow faction in a primary. You do have to be more acceptable to the broader number of voters. And with a ranked choice system, the voices of voters are heard more clearly. You might have candidates decide to run as a Democrat or Republican who right now decide not to run because the system is, they feel so discouraged by the negativity in campaigns, by the incivility, by, the fact that small factions of voters backed by special interests can get their way. So if you really have to win a majority of support in a Republican primary for governor or a Democratic primary for U.S. Senate, you can't just win with your narrow and impassioned base of support. You have to be acceptable to the broader middle of voters in that party. And I think the application of ranked choice voting in the party primary process, which this citizen initiative would make that change too, is a healthy thing for the parties that might drive people back to participate in the party primaries, might encourage more better candidates to run within the parties. At the same time, does it level the playing field for independent and third-party candidates in a general election? Sure, they can run without being told to sit down and shut up, you're a spoiler, we don't care what your ideas are, right? They can participate in the debate. Now, what's going to happen? Right, the two major parties have a built-in advantage. They have the fact that most of us inherit our party identification from our parents. They have lots of money. They have infrastructure. They have resources, right? That's not going away. Most of the time when you have an instant runoff process with ranked choice voting, you are probably going to see that independent third-party candidates are the ones that are finishing in last place. And you will probably get back down to a Democrat and Republican in most cases. But you'll have a Democrat and a Republican who had to reach out to the broader middle of their own party to win the election, who may be then more acceptable to the broader middle of Mainers across the board. And they had to appeal to voters who may have liked the independent candidate or the Green candidate or the Libertarian candidate. Say, if I can't be your first choice, can I be your second choice? Be a part of my majority coalition. That changes the way candidates engage with voters. It changes the way they have to think about campaigning and think about how they govern.
Do any of those municipal systems have primaries?
That's a great question. So there are a number of cities have ranked choice voting that have primary elections as well.
They're partisan elections.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because Portland's mayoral elections are nonpartisan.
That's right. Yes. Yep.
So I want to let you get back in, and we have about 15 minutes, so I want to make sure that
I was wondering about exhausted ballots. Do you have any, either of you have any data about how many ballots end up, I imagine it matters how many candidates there are, but...
I think there's a report that may have some information on that, the Burnett and Kogan report, and I can provide that for you electronically if you'd like. There is data out there that shows the tremendous numbers of exhausted ballots in various races is pretty dramatic. So, yes, I'll get that too. I would like to just remind everyone that Maine would be the only state in the union to do this on a statewide basis. I met with Senator Saviello back in early February, or actually it was the end of January, and this is when the signatures were first certified by our Secretary of State. We knew the ballot was going to be placed on, the question was going to be placed on the ballot. He did not realize it included the federal races, so he had concerns about that too. He had no idea that this also involves the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress. So that is also another big factor here. A lot of op-eds that we read point to the presidential race, but this does not include the race for president. But yet many of the op-eds are looking at that race as sort of an example or a reason, but that is not what the question before the voters is. And I would just like to also say that regarding strategic voting, I think it seems like it actually exacerbates strategic voting. And people have to really stop and think, who's my first choice now? Who's my second choice? Who's my third choice? That is much more strategic than just determining who your favorite candidate is. And I don't know that will diminish that.
How is that different than if you vote for somebody in a primary and they lose, and somebody else gets the nomination?
Well, then you have a new set of candidates to choose from. You don't have the one, maybe your favorite didn't win in the primary, so now you have to...
Somebody didn't vote for one.
Mm-hmm. There's strategy to both systems is what I'm trying to say. I don't know that it diminishes with ranked choice voting, and I think it actually may exacerbate it. But that's just my personal opinion on that. I don't have data that shows that. I don't see how it stops strategic voting. And it seems to me that it may even increase strategic campaigning. Do I run in a party? Do I not run in a party? Do I try to be...
You know what they're talking about, though. They're talking about the Elliott Cutler phenomenon,
yes,
where people were saying, I really like Cutler, but I'm not going to vote for him.
Right, I understand that.
I'm going to vote for somebody who I don't think is as good, because I don't like the other guy.
Right.
You know, right? So
I understand that. Yeah. And I understand also that people are going to have to stop and think, who's my second choice now? That is another strategy. And there are people that put out, bullet vote, don't bullet vote, vote in this order. There's a lot of strategy that goes into campaigning and voting. And I don't know that this proposal eliminates that. I know that it could, I suppose, but it could also not. So I don't see that as definitely not as a positive.
It would just trade one.
It could trade one for another. Yeah. I don't know that that's a strong selling feature. And then I would just like to point out that places where voters have repealed ranked choice voting after experimenting with it include Burlington, Vermont, Aspen, Colorado, Cary, North Carolina, Pierce County, Washington, and ranked choice voting has also been repealed for judicial races in North Carolina. And Telluride, Colorado will be discontinuing ranked choice voting after the next election. Places that have rejected ranked choice voting at the ballot box include Fort Collins, Colorado, Glendale, Arizona, Duluth, Minnesota, and the United Kingdom. And there are also ongoing efforts to repeal it in San Francisco and Oakland. So places where this has been in place, it has not been overwhelmingly welcomed either. And for us to consider this on a statewide basis is a very large step. It's a big proposal. And there are a lot of things to factor in, not only the constitutional concerns, but also the implementation concerns.
So if I can just jump in there, and repeal was brought up again. So there are 2 cities where voters decided to repeal ranked choice voting and replace it with an actual runoff system. And some of the other places that Representative Sirocki mentioned, one, Pierce County, Washington, they had a top 2 system, which is what California first led with. And the Supreme Court in Washington State said, no, it's not.
Describe the difference between top 2 and ranked choice.
Sure. So, and the League of Women Voters, by the way, spent 3 years studying these election reforms and decided ranked choice was best for Maine. So the proposal we've heard from Representative Sirocki and Governor LePage and others is that we might consider actual runoff elections as opposed to ranked choice, where instead of having an instant runoff process built in with the cost efficiencies, you take the 2 top vote getters from the November election and have them come back the first week in December for an actual runoff. The other alternative that's been proposed is perhaps a top 2 process where you actually do away with the party primaries. And all the Democrats, all the Republicans, all the independents, Greens, and Libertarians run together in a jungle primary with 15, 20 candidates. The top 2 candidates from that election go on to face each other in the general election. Some of the problems with top 2, as we're seeing in California right now, is there are 2 Democrats running against each other in the general election for United States Senate in that state right now because 2 candidates of the same party can get the most votes in a crowded primary.
How is that different than the last gubernatorial election we had where Elliott Cutler was, almost a Democrat? Wasn't people... I'm sorry. So, obviously, the 3, you're still looking at situations where you might be picking between 2 people.
Well, so with a top 2 primary, and then I want to get back to the point that I was trying to address, but in a top 2 primary, one, you can have 2 candidates of the same party advance the general election. You can also have 2 candidates, one who receives 17% of the vote and one who receives 12% of the vote, be the top vote getters and advance the general election. 70% of voters may find both of those candidates unacceptable. So it does not give voters really more voice and more choice. I think it's a better system than the one we have now in Maine, but it's in no way better than ranked choice voting, which the League of Women Voters of Maine, a nonpartisan statewide organization, spent 3 years studying election reforms. They looked at ranked choice voting. They looked at actual runoff elections. They looked at top 2. Ranked choice voting and actual runoff elections both restore majority rule, as does top 2. But that's where the similarities end. Only ranked choice voting eliminates the spoiler effect in campaigns. Ranked choice voting puts more power in the hands of voters. You can express your opinion about more than one candidate. You can't do that in an actual runoff system. Ranked choice voting actually takes the gaming out of the politics. So Representative Sirocki was saying, well, this might cause more strategic. No. What we found in places that have ranked choice voting, you can vote for the candidate you like the best, that you think is best for the job, and rank your next best choice as your second choice. So if your favorite candidate can't win, your vote's not wasted. It counts for the candidate you ranked second. That doesn't require a strategic calculation about what the polls say. It requires a calculation of the heart and the mind to say what's in the best interest of my community and my state, and who do I really believe will be the next, should be the next governor, United States senator, congressperson. So this takes that gaming out of the system and gives voters more voice in our elections and more choice between the politicians. Going back to the earlier point, Representative Sirocki listed a number of places that had ranked choice voting and no longer have it. Telluride, Colorado, where a small commission of people decided not to renew doing ranked choice voting because the 2 incumbent members of the city council ended up losing under the ranked choice system. And so to protect the incumbents, they're deciding to go back to the way they've done things now. Pierce County in Washington, as I said, the state had top 2. The court said top 2 is not constitutional. They were looking for an alternative because they didn't want to go back to first past the post, the way we vote now in Maine, because they know it's not a sufficient system to handle voter choice. They adopted ranked choice voting. And then when the court said later, actually top 2 is fine, it was cost prohibitive for them to go it alone as a county. So they decided to bring themselves back into the top 2 process. So, I think voters should examine all these issues. But in reality, every single place that has ranked choice voting today, overwhelmingly voters support it. They report less negative campaigning. They are more satisfied with their election system. Voters have more voice and more choice in their elections. They never have to vote for the lesser of 2 evil. And that really speaks to why voters are satisfied. Voters are really feeling right now, And yes, the presidential race is an example for a lot of people, and no, this initiative does not address that, but it's a start with governor's races, United States Senate races, congressional races, legislative races, to start improving the way we elect our politicians. If the mess in Augusta has taught us anything, we need to change the way we elect our politicians, especially when they can get elected with less than 40% of the vote. Ranked choice voting restores majority rule and ensures that candidates who are opposed by a majority of voters, regardless of their party, can never win. And it does so in a way that eliminates the spoiler effect, helps us tackle some of the incivility in politics, makes politicians more accountable to the broader middle of voters who they need to win elections and to govern successpeter And at the end of the day, Mainers are going to get what they want under any election system. But this captures truer voter preferences. As Peter Mills has said, at the end of the day, after all the votes are counted with ranked choice, voters are going to get what they want. And that's what this really is about putting more power in the hands of voters, giving voters more voice in the political process, so they never have to feel like they have to vote for the lesser of two evils. And at the end of the day, the more consensus candidate is elected.
We have 5 minutes, so anybody?
I've got one question. Kyle, could you address the logistics of getting all these ballots to one place?
So with ranked choice voting, the way the Secretary of State's office has envisioned it is that all the ballots would be counted at the local level just like they are now. And on election night, the clerks would report out first choice rankings for all the different races. For the handful of races where no candidate receives an outright majority, they envision that the paper ballots from the hand count towns would go to one or more central locations to be tabulated with to be counted with high-speed tabulators. For the vast majority of us who come from tabulator towns, there's a secure USB device that has a digital scan of the ballot. That's taken to one or more central locations. And the Secretary of State's office would conduct the instant runoff process. That might take a couple days or a week to know the end result in those races. That's far superior to actual runoff elections, in which you have to wait 4 weeks to know who won the election. And by the way, we didn't talk about it, but some of the other challenges with actual runoff elections, which are what is proposed by our opponents, in addition to more cost, and actual runoff elections could cost up to $2 million for our state, which shoulders additional financial administrative burdens on cities and towns. Ranked choice voting does not. And that's why the Secretary of State's roadmap says we're not going to put more burden on town clerks. We're going to absorb the additional work. Actual runoff elections also disenfranchise absentee and overseas voters. If you are serving your country overseas in the military, there is simply not enough time to get you a ballot, have it returned, and count under an actual runoff system in a 4-week period of time. Only ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is the only runoff system that allows absentee and overseas voters, including men and women in uniform, to fully participate in our elections.
I want to give Representative Sirocki the last word.
I would say regarding the overseas and out of the country or out of state voters, you could consider in the future, as some other states have, to allow those voters to participate in a ranked choice voting type system. But that would be a very different proposal than doing this on a statewide basis. So there are other options we could consider in the future. Again, I consider this a violation of the Constitution in 3 important ways. And I don't think that it completely solves a lot of the concerns that have been raised. I remain convinced that this does not guarantee a majority, just a majority of the leftover ballots.
Well, thank you very much. This is great.
Thanks for joining us for this Portland Press Herald podcast. For more discussion on this issue, visit us at pressherald.com/opinion or send an email to lettersToTheEditor@pressherald.com. For more podcast episodes, visit our podcast page, pressherald.com/podcast, and you can always subscribe on iTunes.